Good morning, this is Jim Williams with the Hurricane City Tropical Update for August 4th, 10:15 a.m. We have a lot of activity in the tropics. We have Ernesto in the Caribbean Sea. We had Invest 91L off the Florida coast yesterday that has been taken off the map due to unfavorable conditions. And we have a new tropical storm Florence out in the far East Atlantic, but this update is mainly going to focus on Tropical Storm Ernesto because that has the most impacts for landfall. Here is the Weather Underground ensemble model map from August 1st. This was when this was first classified as a tropical depression out in the far well east of the Leeward Islands. And notice how this is where the system is right around here right now. And the models pretty much nailed this. The majority of the models, they took it generally towards Central America, which is what I said in the last update video, that this should end up being somewhere in the Central America from Cancun down to Honduras would be the landfall. And so far it's right on schedule. It's doing exactly what the ensemble models and the official forecast was calling for at this point. There were a few models that wanted to take it over the Greater Antilles up in here and into the Gulf of Mexico, but that's looking less likely as time goes by. Now here is the current ensemble model maps from the Weather Underground, and you can see that we have basically the same thinking here, maybe a little more of a spread, whether the system's going to get close to Jamaica or not, coming up near Cancun, and then you have a group of models down here. But anyway, the moral of the story is it's 2-to-1 for no landfall in the United States versus landfall in the United States. So the people that are nervous up in the northern Gulf Coast and Texas, I'm not saying to let your guard down, but it's beginning to look more and more likely that the ridge will hold in place and keep this thing moving generally off to the west-northwest for the foreseeable future. And this will not be turning north into the Gulf of Mexico, although the GFDL wants to indicate that, but the GFDL hasn't had a real good track record with this system either. All right, here are the all-important intensity models on this system. And basically the intensity models, they've had a little bit of a problem with Ernesto up to this point, but the best overall performer on the intensity models has been the IVCN model. And the IVCN model is the purple model. It has it peaking out right up here at around strong Category 1 hurricane, right when it's approaching the Yucatan Peninsula. And then notice it drops off here as it goes over land and then reemerges in the Gulf of Mexico heading towards Mexico. And that is the best performer as far as intensity is concerned. Right now, I mean, if you look at where it is, where it's going to be when it's approaching the Yucatan, you're talking most of the models, if you factor them all together, somewhere between 70 and 90 mile per hour winds as it approaches the Yucatan Peninsula. But as of this time, it looks like this is not going to be a direct impact on Jamaica, but rather the Yucatan Peninsula looks like this is where this is all going to go down, and this could end up being a little bit stronger than this because the conditions are rather favorable in the western Caribbean Sea. Here's the wind shear analysis from the University of Wisconsin showing our system Ernesto out in here in the eastern Caribbean Sea. But what's interesting to note on this is that the high pressure, you like to have a high pressure sitting over the top of a developing system to ventilate it from wind shear, but in this particular case, the high pressure system's off to the southwest of the center of circulation, so it's still struggling a little bit. You got this wind shear just northeast of the center of circulation, kind of blowing the tops behind the center. And sometimes when you see that happen, you'll see the center outrace the convection. We'll be watching for that over the next 24 to 36 hours, but it looks like if this thing continues to hold its own or strengthen, then I think when this gets south of Jamaica and into the western Caribbean, we're going to have really favorable conditions down in here because not only is it the upper level winds will be light at that time, but the sea surface temperatures are piping hot. I'll show you some maps on that. While I have this map up, though, we have a upper level low in the southeastern Gulf of Mexico, but the indications are that this is going to drift off to the west and get out of the way as Ernesto enters the western Caribbean Sea. So there really shouldn't be any wind shear for Ernesto, and this could crank up maybe even a Category 2 hurricane by the time it gets over to the Yucatan, and then we'll have to see what happens when it gets in the Gulf. All right, here's the steering flow of what's going on out in the Atlantic right now, and you can see a definite steering flow to the west towards the Yucatan and Central America, so it wouldn't surprise me if this continues to cruising just north of due west for the remainder of the period, followed by more of a poleward motion once it gets into the Gulf of Mexico, maybe La Pesca, Mexico, somewhere up in there. Might have to deal with this eventually, but it's beginning to look unlikely this will be a U.S. landfalling storm, although Texas might need to keep an eye on this. This could turn maybe more further north at the end of the period than what we're thinking. All right, I just wanted to use this image to rub it in a little bit. There's a lot of people on the internet that love to use the MJO, the Madden-Julian oscillation, and this is the ebbs and flows around the planet of rising air and favorable conditions for tropical development. The green areas would be favorable and the brown areas would be not really favorable. And right now we have, for all argument's sake, we have about 3 systems in the Atlantic right now, one strengthening, 2 of them strengthening, and we have a negative MJO. So this is why I don't really put a lot of weight in the MJO, but nevertheless, we have development in the Atlantic in 2 different locations with a negative MJO. So just keep that in mind when you think about the MJO. All right, here is the pressure map. This is the all-important pressure map. This is from sailweather.info. And all these links, by the way, these images I'm showing you can be found on Jim's predictions page down at the bottom. But this is the pressure readings right now, and we have a high pressure ridge out here that's steering Ernesto off to the west. Here's Ernesto down here. And we have 1020, 1023 millibar. This is steering pressure ridge right out in here. And when you have that, it's going to push the system to the west. So what you do is you like to look for the lowest pressures in the basin to figure out where this thing could potentially go. Well, we have 1016, 1014 up in here, but look down here, 1012. So more than likely this is going to head generally in this type of direction where the lowest pressures. A hurricane's going to go in the path of least resistance. High pressure gets in their way, so they're going to find the path of least resistance, which is low pressure, and that would be towards Central America. And that's the way it looks right now, the way the pressure readings are out in the Atlantic. And this is what I've talked about favorable conditions for development of this system when it gets in the Western Caribbean. This is the 78-degree isotherm map, and this is a map showing the temperatures well below the surface that are warm enough to support a hurricane. Now, some of these red areas over here in the Western Caribbean Sea are, you know, several hundred feet below the surface of temperatures warm enough to support a hurricane. So even if this system was to slow down in here, which all indications are that it might, it would cause what's called upwelling, where it brings the colder water from underneath the surface to the surface. But in this case, there's so much warm water below the surface that even if it did that, and there was a lot of upwelling, there would be a lot of warm water being brought to the surface. There's a lot of fuel for this system in the Western Caribbean Sea, and I think this thing could crank up at least a Category 2 by the time it gets in that area. Now here's Florence out here in the East Atlantic, and this system looks pretty well organized, but if you'll notice here, there's some dry air being pulled into the system, and the NHC forecast indicates this is going to move west, be sheared a little bit, and dry air is going to take over, and most of the models dissipate this in a few days out, so we're not going to put a lot of emphasis on this, but if it makes it all the way across, we'll start focusing on it a little more. But the long-range GFS model wants to take it out to sea anyway, so it's kind of a moot point. Even if it did develop, it looks like it's going to get dragged out to sea. It's going to go more west-northwest and get caught up in the troughs out there and get sucked out into the open Atlantic. All right, let me switch sources here and look at our temperatures from the Hurricane City maps. And here we go. We have the models embedded on the sea surface temperatures. And you can see that we have temperatures 29 degrees Celsius, talking 84 to 85 degree temperatures in the Western Caribbean Sea here. And our best performing model on the map right now is the AP09, the Aviation Ensemble models. They've done really well with this system so far, Ernesto, and they're indicating a weaker system heading into Central America. But that, you know, these models shift after every run, so you can't really focus on any one model. What you want to look at is the group of models, although we have somewhat of a fanning out of the models right now. Bottom line is the majority of the models take this into the Yucatan Peninsula, and that's what the best performing models are indicating right now, with the outlier being the GFDI model, which is an interpolated version of the GFDL model, and the GFDL model wants to take it poleward into the Gulf of Mexico. But the thinking is that even if this was to really strengthen a lot, which is what the GFDL is indicating, that this could be up near major hurricane strength over here. The problem is the ridge is really supposed to build in here. Even if this were to strengthen, the thinking is when they get stronger, they go more poleward. That's true, if there's not a real strong high pressure ridge to the north, but I still think this is going to be forced into the Yucatan Peninsula in some way or form, shape or form, and continue moving west-northwest, but we'll keep an eye out for that. But this is a real handy model to use. Wanted to quickly look at the buoys real quick here, and if they don't show up, I'm going to switch back to the radar. Oh, there we go. There's our buoys, and you know, our current position right over here to the right of where the models are. And if you model over the buoy, actually we have to zoom in on the buoy, and there's our buoy, 19 knot gust, pressure 2986. And then if we shift over a little bit to the Western Caribbean, and let's look at this, is 2993 pressure. So the pressures aren't real low over here, and again, that would indicate that there's a high pressure ridge to the north of this, and it's going to steer it more to the west. So I'm thinking these models here are pretty right, the 3 models that take it into the Yucatan Peninsula. And finally, here's our satellite radar advisory link below the tracking map, and this pulls up a satellite image with all the models overlaid on it. You can pan this in, zoom it out, and see the pressures and the winds at the surface and everything else. A real cool feature to use at Hurricane City. Anyway, that's about it for now. I'll be featuring, we're going to continue to use St. Lucia as the current feature because Ernesto did give them gusts of 60 miles an hour, so there probably is a little bit of damage in the eastern Caribbean Sea from the aftermath of Ernesto. It remains to be seen whether we're going to feature a city in Jamaica, because it looks like this might go far enough south of Jamaica that where they might not even get any sustained tropical storm force winds. We'll make that call, but right now it looks like it's going to be the Yucatan Peninsula. So if you're paying attention in the Yucatan, get ready to be prepared for hurricane conditions going into next week. Well, that's it for now. Thank you again for visiting Hurricane City.